Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for being on Q&A with Tirana Times. Germany has been a lot in the news lately, both in local terms and international ones. Much of it relating to the migration and refugee crisis. As this subject also relates to Albania, I would like to start with questions about it. German authorities have made it clear that virtually all asylum seekers from Albania will be processed quickly and returned to their country of origin. What are the immediate plans on the return of about 30,000 Albanians who have applied for asylum in Germany so far this year?
Well, I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to speak about this because it's really a very important matter right now. And I guess you follow the news, what's happening in Germany, in Austria, and Hungary, and Serbia, and so on, Macedonia, over the last couple of weeks, particularly in Germany now, where we have had tens of thousands of arrivals of refugees from Syria and other countries. And we have done a lot now, we have done a lot in terms of humanitarian assistance, but it is perfectly clear that we can only continue to do that if we manage to get economic migrants as soon back into their own home countries. And this is what we're trying to do now with Albania. We are flying in people practically on a daily basis now with airplanes. There is no master plan. I cannot tell you, when all these 30,000 will have returned. But we are flying them in on a very regular basis now, just to show to everybody we really mean it when we say there is no economic asylum. And I can only really plead with people that they should give up this idea to seek economic asylum in Germany. It doesn't work that way.
The Albanian opposition has accused the government here of driving people to migrate through tough reforms that have hit poor Albanians hard. The push factor is poverty and hopelessness at home, the opposition says, blaming the government of mismanaging the situation here. Is the Albanian government partly to blame for the wave of Albanian migrants who are seeking a new life in Germany this year?
Look, I will not go into this kind of domestic infighting at all. This is not my business. And also one has to say that this whole migration wave is a very complicated matter. There are the so-called pull factors, there are the push factors, and so on. What I will say as to the situation here in Albania is the following. I think it's a question for the entire Albanian society, the entire Albanian political class, to ask themselves the fundamental question, hey, what is going on in this country that so many people are actually ready to leave? And one has to say, because I really would not want to contribute to turning this into a party political football, I think finger pointing is not good at all in this connection, that this has been a phenomenon which has been going on over a long time, migration. And it is not only an issue which affects Albania, it affects the whole region from the Western Balkans. We've had very many people who ask for asylum. And lastly, about these reforms you refer to. Of course, I'm perfectly clear that there may be a certain connection. People who had to pay their electricity bill may have come to the conclusion, maybe going to Germany is an option. But I have to say, I have been in favor of such reforms and I continue to be in favor of this because I think it's high time that, in a sense, Albania gets its house in order and that really people pay up, And I still find it difficult to understand that a situation was tolerated for so many years where even people who were not poor at all, who ran businesses, simply got away with not paying their electricity bill. And you can imagine all kinds of suspicions are attached to that too. So yes, I think one needs to pursue such policies. But I think I would hope, watching the scenery here, that people do it with a good sense of judgment, like the present case of the fight against informality. I think that's also a good idea as such. But I do hope that not the elderly farmer's woman around the corner who sells a couple of kilos of tomatoes and onions will be checked whether she has a cash machine printing out a ticket, you know.
But the anecdotal evidence we're getting at this point is that some of these very small businesses are being checked, and there's fear that unemployment will rise as a result of this latest informality campaign. Are there any concerns about that?
Well, I have no sort of detailed knowledge about that. My only advice is to do that, with a good degree of common sense. But as such, I think, Albania, and we want to speak maybe a bit about Europe too, in this conversation. Albania wants to join the European Union, and at some point, you cannot have a member of the Union which is a bit like a third world country, with a huge informal sector. So at some point you have to address this issue. And I think the sooner the better. But, my modest advice would be to do it with a good degree, of common sense.
We will get to questions about EU integration. I just have one more question on the migration refugee crisis. Albanians are only part of this large wave Germany and other European countries are facing. This is a mixture of, as you mentioned, there are the economic migrants, but many are from war-torn countries from outside Europe. This week, border controls were reestablished. Is this crisis hurting the free movement concept in Europe? But I'm more particularly interested about Albania because it's entangled in all this. Is Albania at risk of facing travel restrictions in the future?
Well, to start with, I think it's to state the obvious that when you reintroduce border controls, this has, in a way, a negative impact on the freedom of movement in the Schengen area, which we are talking about here. And this is, of course, as such a matter of regret. But under the circumstances, I think it was absolutely necessary to do that. But I have to say, because I read an article today which said Germany leaves the Schengen agreement, that's absolutely untrue. There is a clear provision in the Schengen agreement that under certain circumstances you can reintroduce border controls, and this is what we're doing. We are, by the way, not doing it on an across-the-board basis. It is more random checks in order to bring order back into the entry movements, because as a result of these rather chaotic developments, this kind of order got pretty much lost. So it is a temporary measure which is necessary under the circumstances. And as far as Albanians are concerned, they are not more affected by that than anybody else. And we do indeed, just to add this, we ask for understanding that people may have to wait longer, at borders, at border crossing points, but that's unfortunately unavoidable.
Okay. There have been some reports that there is a plan in the works to make it easier for qualified people from the Western Balkans to work in Germany legally. So these would be people that apply for work permit at the embassy and they get it. Is this a new program that's making it easier to work, or is this simply more education on existing opportunities?
Well, indeed, the leading figures of the governing coalition under the chairmanship of the Chancellor herself, they met a couple of days ago and they decided a few basic points of our policy with respect to this whole migration and asylum crisis. And one of them is indeed to open up the German labor market in a measured way for the West Balkan states. I underline that, for the West Balkan states alone as candidate countries for the European Union. The details still need to be worked out, but basically it is true that we want to do that in order to alleviate this asylum situation. Because there is this fundamental misunderstanding here in Albania and also in other Western Balkan states that people who actually want to work in Germany think the way to do that is to ask for asylum. And that is absolutely wrong. And I can only say, if you want to work, do not ask for asylum. What you can do already today, and what has been possible for quite some time already, is that for people with special skills and recognized qualifications, they can travel to Germany using the visa liberalization regime. And if they find a German employer who offers them a work contract, and if they get their qualifications recognized by German authorities, and they should ask their employer, their potential employer, to help them how to do that, then they can come back to Tirana, to the German embassy, and apply for a long-term visa to work in Germany. That's the way they should do it. And the debate now will be over whether we will reduce, let's say, the qualification requirements so that people with less qualifications can also basically go down that route.
I want to bring it back to the issue of European integration, a key issue for Albania. This week, several Albanian media outlets reported that Prime Minister Rama told a German press conference, he's visiting there this week, that journalists should ask the German Chancellor when Albania will join the EU, not him, not the Prime Minister. It's the latest in a series of remarks that shifts the blame on Germany and the EU for Albania's slow progress toward EU integration. Is Mr. Rama right?
Well, let me say yes and no. Yes, in the sense that it is actually the member states who decide who will become a member. It is like in a tennis club. It's the members of the tennis club and not the applicant who decide who can join the tennis club. What is not right, of course, is that he or Albania, or that you should only ask the Chancellor. You have to ask 27 heads of government, and I really mean that. It is a decision taken collectively by all the EU member states and the heads of government and the governments in general. So to start with, and I have to say in this connection, I have often detected a fundamental misunderstanding also in Albania about the role of the Commission in this, because the Commission make recommendations. They say we recommend, for instance, to give candidate status to Albania, and then there was no positive decision of the governments. The Commission only recommends, the governments decide. But in general, I would say it is not a matter of the whim of governments whether they say a country can be admitted or not. There are clear benchmarks which are defined, and countries have to make sure that they make the progress required to be able to join. And of course, I know that sometimes there is a difference of interpretation as to whether, the benchmarks have already been fulfilled or not. And, people may have different views on that. But I would say one should not approach this with a we tick the boxes approach. Because people, let's say in Germany, have a fairly clear idea what it means in terms of substance that certain benchmarks have actually been sort of achieved. And this is the real debate. To what extent has Albania done its homework? And I'm sure the German government, like the other 26 governments, will take a look at that when the time is right for that.
Okay. Another hot news item in Albania this week, there's been a series of news items related to people with murky pasts holding elected office in Albania. Does the fact that Albania has people with alleged and or proven criminal ties serving in public office hurt the country's relations with Germany and the EU?
Well, look, it's a bit like when you have 27 tenants living in a house and someone applies to join these 27 tenants to become the 28th tenant. And of course, these 27 tenants look at this applicant and say, how does he look like, And whenever such a potential tenant brings with him or with her a bag of problems, that certainly doesn't help to start with. On the substance itself, everybody knows that Albania has a reputation problem for many reasons, and this has been going on for many years. And I'm very pleased to see that perceptions are changing for the better now. But this issue of a rather sort of unsavory connection between what you call murky characters in politics is certainly doing no good for the reputation of Albania. And I would indeed say, if you want to become the 8th or so tenant as soon as possible, it is certainly not a bad idea. I would use a rather strong term now to attack this cancer as efficiently and as soon as possible.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for being on Tirana Times Q&A.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thank you.